Welcome to Taking Stock. I'm Amanda Lang. Coming up on the show, a fall fiscal update just in time for a winter that could put a chill on the Canadian economy. And having a job is a pretty important measure of well-being. But what about being happy at that job? Plus, Netflix rolls out ads, and we have to say, this feels like a movie we've seen before. That's all ahead. First, though, for the week that was in business, it's time for the briefs. Canada's finance minister delivered a fall fiscal update this week that holds the line on spending while charting a course back to budgetary balance, though that won't happen for 5 years. The $6 billion in new spending this year is partly aimed at providing relief for Canadians, including removing interest payments on federal student loan debt. But Finance Minister Chrystia Freeland made it clear she wants to keep some powder dry in case a recession hits the country hard. One thing the federal government is spending on is outsourcing. Contracts going to outside suppliers jumped 24% in the year ended March. That's despite record hiring sprees that also sent the size of the public service up 24%. The amount of outsourcing will be in focus because the government made a campaign promise to reduce it. That was back in 2015, and since then, outsourced work is up 74%. Canadians are feeling worse about their finances than they did at the depths of the pandemic or during the great financial crisis. The Bloomberg Nanos Canadian Confidence Index said 47% of us are feeling worse about our situation than a year ago. That's as home prices fall and other costs rise. Meanwhile, Equifax reported that credit card usage rose for a sixth straight quarter as more Canadians rely on credit cards to cover costs. One grocery department will certainly get more expensive as the Canadian Dairy Commission approves another 2.2% increase in milk prices as of next February. That follows two increases this year that upped prices 10.9% and will drive the price of other dairy products higher as well. Canada is upping its targets for immigration, building on record levels last year and this from above 400,000. The goal is to have 500,000 new Canadians a year by 2025. The government will aim for about half of those to help fill job vacancies, but also acknowledge that the sheer number of new households will also worsen problems in housing supply. Meanwhile, we got a read on jobs in both Canada and the U.S. for October. Both countries showed strong gains, with Canada producing 10 times more jobs than expected in September at 108,000. Wage gains remain high at 5.6%. That's likely to keep the pressure on central banks to tame inflation with higher rates. And those are your business briefs. Those record job vacancies in Canada make one thing worse, and that's how burnt out employees feel. Doing more work for the same pay or feeling unrecognized for their work can both contribute to burnout. That is far from a new phenomenon, though. Jennifer Moss is the author of The Burnout Epidemic. Jennifer, great to have you with us.
It's great to be with you.
So we would hope that if there's a silver lining to how tight the labor market is, it's that employees have a bit of empowerment and that they could actually take this opportunity to make changes. However, we fear that what we're seeing instead is that the few that are there are having to do more work and maybe not being recognized for it. What do you see out there? What do you think is the balance?
That's absolutely true. We're seeing more people having to deal with this mass attrition, the great resignation. And so there's few resources, which is just perpetuating the burnout because those people left are doing more and having less capacity to do it. And they're all exhausted. There are benefits to what's happened is that there's more people talking about these issues. Employees do have a little bit more power. But, you know, as we see the recession or potential recession or some of these issues come up, there may be, a turnover of power, and that may even put more stress on this workforce.
You've been looking at these issues around workplace well-being and burnout for years. Pre-pandemic, there's a lot of data that you've looked at and compiled over time. Is there a difference today, and is it generational? Is there a younger generation that is experiencing this differently, or is this something that you have seen for years now?
You know, I joke that I used to be a happiness expert and now I'm an unhappiness expert, unfortunately. But I know that this has been a problem for a long time. I have been researching it, yes, and sort of shouting to pay attention, for leaders to actually acknowledge that this is an issue. But the pandemic, like every other issue that we've seen, it's just exploded these existing problems, and burnout and the way that we've treated employees for a long time hasn't really been human-centered. And so what happens, that crises just highlights these problems. And now we're seeing these employees now more resigning, more attrition. We're seeing people leave their sectors entirely. We're seeing the highest level of mental health disability claims in Canada that we've seen historically across the workforce. So just in general, it's a very tired workforce, and it doesn't seem like they're getting any time for recovery or respite.
One of the other things you've worked a long time on, and you had a business focused on this, was actually helping put tools in place so that we can measure our own happiness and that our employers can understand our happiness. We don't actually have good metrics or measurements for happiness. We don't think about it or talk about it. It's funny because it's so important, but we don't really have rubrics for it. How are we doing on that front? Are employers getting better at finding ways to accurately measure not just engagement, because that's a little bit different, but actual well-being and happiness?
I don't think we've really got there yet. I don't think we've got to the point where we can really understand what well-being looks like or happiness actually looks like. And I think that's just across the board. It's a difficult thing to measure, but we can measure for burnout. And there are scales and several academic scales and other professional scales that are looking at burnout and managing stress. And when I think about happiness, I think, how do we make sure we're not giving ice cream to people that need water? Tackling those upstream, issues at the root is really going to then lead to increasing happiness downstream.
So good to have you, Jennifer. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you for having me, Amanda. Great to see you again.
Jennifer Moss is a workplace consultant and author of The Burnout Epidemic. Up next, a fall fiscal update paints a picture of the government's plans while Canadians struggle. Some ideas about how to increase our prosperity. Next.